everyone. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-apologist.com, where truth matters. You probably have noticed in the past century or so that Satan has a lot of tools out there in his toolbox. He has a lot of tools who actually have names. People like Aleister Crowley and others who created a place called Satanic Temple for satanic worship. You see him pictured here, Aleister Crowley, in the Beatles album cover for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And in fact, 20 years ago today is a reference when the album came out in 1967 to 1947 when Aleister Crowley passed away. And so the Beatles, of course, feature him in the top left corner here. But we also have other tools that Satan is using. And so let's take a look at that. We're going to look at the impact of Satan on the past century and up until today. First, we'll talk about the impact of Satan on rock and roll, and then we'll talk about the impact of Satan on social media, and we'll feature a couple of prominent atheists who have expressed themselves either on YouTube or in their own blogs. You see a couple of here. I have more surprises for you. So you've come to the right place. Let's go. Here we go. So in the 20th century, you probably noticed that Satan had a big impact on sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that came from people like Aleister Crowley and his influence on many artists, many recording artists. He was born October 12, 1875. He lived to December 1st, 1947. He was known as a satanist, occultist, the wickedest man in the world, according to the media. He was also called the Great Beast. And he's associated with Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, Ozzy Osbourne, and many more. He, of course, also had an influence on songs like Hotel California, Sympathy for the Devil, and Highway to Hell. And then you might recall the Beatles and the influence, unfortunately, he had on the Beatles. And I say hi with my cute little doggie here. This is a new dog that we have. She's just adorable and she wants to be held right now. So that's the deal. But in John Lennon's Imagine song, which interestingly enough keeps being played in graduation ceremonies. It was played in my son's graduation ceremony at a high school, public high school. I found that shameful because of the words. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Aha, ha, ha. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You hoo hoo hoo. It's all about thou shalt do as thou will. It's all about the opposite of the values God sets in us. God tells us to be selfless. Aleister Crowley believes in selfishness. And all about the self, the exaltation of the self. And unfortunately, we are seeing that in today's culture in a big way. But let's keep going and discussing other influences. Again, the good versus evil we see. Do what thou want. That is something that the Beatles sang about, something that Aleister Crowley pushed, something that other Satanists push, versus thy will be done. On the Lord's Prayer, it says, thy will be done. Thy will be done, as C.S. Lewis said, or thy will be done. And so you can see there's a distinction there if you do as God wills. If we do, we are going to be in the fold. God helps those who love him. He loves those who love him. There's also the distinction between what we see today, my body, my choice, versus Jesus saying, my body given up for you. In 1 John 2:22, it says, who is a liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. So unfortunately, we are seeing a plethora of people today who are in that sort of denial. One is Dan McClellan. Here is the influence of Satan on people like him. Here he is saying Jesus isn't saying he's God. This is a Muslim argument. This is something that goes to the Muslim apologists. You wouldn't think you'd see it coming from a Christian, former Christian. I think he was a Mormon before. But then again, I think that the Mormons might actually believe that Jesus was not the Son of God, but I'm not totally familiar with their beliefs. But here's how Jesus, in one verse of many, where Jesus countered this silly idea. Here's what he says when he was responding to the high priest in Mark 14:60-62, right before he was crucified. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But he remained silent and made no answer. As I digress for a second, compare that to Isaiah 53. Okay? He was led to the slaughter. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. And he made no sound. And the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." We have a direct reference to Psalm 110 and to Daniel 7. And if you don't see that is a reference to him claiming to be the Son of God, then you're either, unfortunately, ignorant of the scriptures and the beliefs of the Old Testament, or ignorant of the beliefs of the New Testament, or you just are willfully blind in suppressing that information. It's a shame either way. And here we also have another example. Dan McClellan, he's got a channel now with around 95,000 people who are actually listening to this garbage. He is trying to promote and peddle his notion that the Bible's sexual ethic is irrelevant today. No, no, it's not. In fact, it says in Romans 1:18-20, something that isn't irrelevant, something we should believe, and something if you don't believe, you're going to find yourself in a fiery pit. Hate to say it, but it's true. Here's what it says: "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of man who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. For God hath shown it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." In Revelation 21:8, it says, "But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death." Make a note of that. Pretty important. I wouldn't ignore it. Here we also have Dan McClellan peddling his notion that the Bible doesn't actually say that abortion is murder. No, I'm sorry. In the 10 Commandments, it's quite clear. "Thou shalt not murder." Dan, open your eyes. Proverbs 6:17 even says, "Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood." Well, you can't be more innocent than the unborn. Psalm 106:38 says, "They poured out innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood." We see that now. Unfortunately, in the United States, we've had around 70 million babies, unfortunately ended since 1973, since Roe v. Wade. It's a real shame what's going on. And we were forewarned about this in the book of Isaiah 5:20. "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Woe to those. Okay, let's continue. We also see the influence of other people. So not just Dan McClellan, we see it on the Mythvision channel. Derek Lambert, unfortunately, has this peddling idea of if there's a myth. I'm going to get into that in just a second when I bring up Tim O'Neill. So we'll get into that with the myth idea. Also, we have people like Paulogia, who just made a video about a number of people mispronouncing his name. I'm not sure if I am, but he can let me know. And Bart Ehrman, with their little video here, "Axe is big cap." Well, as it received 1 star of his own accord, perhaps that's a lie itself. Axe is truth. Axe is the truth. It was written by Luke. Luke was a devoted follower of Jesus. He was a medical doctor. He also traveled with Paul starting in Acts 16:8, as he self-reported. Suppressing the truth about Jesus while ignoring the way the earliest Christian apostles and disciples were martyred for the truth is baloney. It's a shame. It's unfortunate. The people who are denying the truth of Jesus refuse to look into what the earliest apostles and disciples said and did. These people had full knowledge of the truth. Many of them were eyewitnesses to the truth. They were in the unique position to know whether what they were preaching was the absolute truth, and many gave up their lives for it. You cannot be a bigger testifier than one who gives up his or her life to show what he believes. These people have been pairing themselves up with ancient heretics and liars, people such as Celsus and Porphyry. Celsus was, he had a book against Celsus. Porphyry was this clown in the 3rd century AD who did not like Christians. He wrote a book against Christians, and he tried to claim that the book of Daniel was written in the 2nd century because he knew the theological implications of the fact that Daniel prophesied in the 6th century BC about Antiochus Epiphanes. In fact, this exact foundation of theory coming out of the German universities and stemming into other universities, falling into other universities, I should say, such as U.S. universities, this idea that if you see a prophecy in the Bible, it must mean that that portion of the Bible was written after the prophecy. That exact notion is what led Porphyry to claim Daniel was written in the 2nd century because he saw the prophecy of Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the beast who appeared in the temple, who mistreated the Maccabees. It's all written about in the Maccabees, 1st and 2nd, 3rd and 4th. You could go take a look at that. But Porphyry was one of the first to do that. And then, of course, we see a number of atheist apologists following that. Some of them under the guise of Christianity, pretending they're Christians, writing against the truth. They see the theological implications of all of the prophecies in the book of Isaiah, so they make up Deutero-Isaiah theory. Same exact thing happened when they saw in the Moses' writings. They noticed there were some prophecies about people going into exile, so they made up the JEPD theory. That is what they do. And continuing that same idea, we see people today doing that. So this is the idea. Here's a person, Dr. John Collins. He is the one who took this Porphyry idea, extended it into a book. He again begins with the assumption that fulfilled prophecies aren't possible because of the theological implications. So he post-dates the prophetic text and comes up with these theories, which I just discussed. Another person who does something similar with the New Testament. If you see people who claim that the New Testament Gospels were written after the year 70, ask yourself why. Do they have any sort of evidence aside from the fact that they see that Jesus prophesied the fall of the Jerusalem temple, which occurred by the Romans in the year 70? There is no other reason that they post-date the Gospels to after that. They don't have a reason in the writing. They don't have a reason in history. The only reason they have is because they say that the history must have occurred after, because Jesus could not have known that the temple was going to be destroyed. The other thing that Tim O'Neill says is Paul only had a vision of Jesus. He, of course, ignores passages. Of course, Paul did see Jesus on the road to Damascus. He was getting ready to slaughter a bunch of Christians who were members of what he called the Way. And he had already received sort of his legal reasoning. He was able to do that legally. Under his Jewish law, he was a Pharisee, devout. He was very much a believer in God, but he did not believe in the Way. And he was on the road to Damascus where Jesus struck him down, blinded him, and said, Paul, Paul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. And Paul ended up writing around 13 books of the New Testament because he became one of the most devout believers in Jesus. And of course, he also was beheaded for his beliefs. He was martyred for his beliefs because he knew the truth. Jesus appeared to him. Now, Tim and others want to ignore what Jesus actually said. In 1 Corinthians 15, it said he saw Jesus. He didn't say he saw a vision of Jesus, Tim. He said he saw Jesus. And in Acts 23:11, which Tim conveniently left out of his blog that somebody shared with me, I had a Gmail come from a person who said, please, I'm having trouble. Please take a look at this guy's blog, which I did. And he ignored Acts 23:11, where Jesus literally stood next to Paul and comforted him when Paul was going through trials. Tim also same thing with Dan McClellan, claimed that only 5 people eyewitnessed to Jesus' resurrection. He's ignoring the fact that Jesus appeared in the house to 11 apostles, and there were also the disciples in the house. We have a witness to that in the book of Acts when they picked out the replacement for Judas. We also have, of course, women apostles who would have been present there. Jesus also appeared to Clopas and his companion, see Luke 24. He also appeared to Mary Magdalene, first just by herself, and then to Mary Magdalene and other women on the road. Okay, so he appeared to numerous people. And then Paul says, he appeared individually to people like Peter and to James, the relative of Jesus. He also appeared, of course, to Paul individually, as we saw. He, in cases like, for example, Act 23:11. He also, as far as his resurrection, he appeared to 500, as Paul pointed out. He said some are sleeping, some are still awake, and can, of course, corroborate what Paul said. It was written at the same time. Then they go on to this other little theory. They say that this whole story was crafted, and their way of proving this, and this also reaches back to Mythvision, is if they can find ancient myths that share some similarities, then the people in the first century must have used those ancient myths to craft a story of Jesus. Or if they can find resurrections that occurred in ancient times, then Jesus' resurrection doesn't have the meaning that it has. These are silly, silly ways to try to deny the truth. Because so what? You can find miracles today. It doesn't mean that one miracle doesn't happen because you found another miracle. If you said that today, hey, it's amazing what this news reporter did. He shot from nobody knowing him to many people knowing him. You got people like Charlie Kirk going from being a nobody, a total nobody, walking around on college campuses to totally being a somebody. Well, somebody who's got their same mentality might say, oh gosh, I know Clark Kent also went from a nobody to a somebody. Therefore, Charlie Kirk must not exist because Clark Kent became Superman. Okay, these are the silliest things. You're finding some myth and you're trying to claim that ancient people were very unoriginal, number one, but also were so desperate that they had to craft a myth about Jesus. Why would they do that if it weren't the truth? People don't die for a lie, guys. Wake up, please. All right, so what else? What's the last war of Satan? Well, the last one, as reported at Fatima by Mother Mary, was the war on the family. Unfortunately, today we see 2.7 divorces each year in the United States per every 1,000 couples. According to census, 43% of first marriages end in divorce, 60% of second marriages, 73% of third marriages. A lot of this is the result of Satan's sexual revolution in the 1960s, the ease of abortion that followed, and the fact that many, many babies have been slaughtered. Unfortunately, we live in a culture of death. We need to get back to being a culture of life. We need to get back to the truth in Jesus. If you like this kind of content, please like, subscribe, and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you, everybody, and God bless you.